out there. I'm in here in the Northwoods Fun House of Sound in the woods somewhere deep in the heart of Connecticut. And I'm coming to you today with another boring but I think essential topic. I hope it will have some meaning. Today we're going to talk about sounds that are too loud. It's a crazy sound. It's my shapeshifter. I thought I was pulling down the right fader. There. So I'm going to cover the idea of how do you make decisions in the studio. This applies to any production stage, any production job where you're making the decisions. Outside of music, it applies too, similarly. In this case, I've done what I call I hyper-distilled the concept of music production down to the smallest piece I could. And that is a 3-point concept here. That what we are, well, basically I'm trying to say, what are we actually doing when we're producing music? Literally, what are we doing? And it's a 3-stage process that is looped until you're tired or done, or you give up. First stage is listening. Second stage is choosing, the decision-making stage. And the third stage is doing, and then listening. So let's say I'm adding a keyboard part to the song. First, I'm listening to the song probably and deciding it needs a keyboard part, and I'm gonna choose this one as a starting point, then I do it. Then I listen back, and I make another decision. It needs to be redone, or it's good, or I need to adjust, I need to edit it, and then I do that. And then I listen again, and I make a decision, and I do it. So the doing part is covered in a lot of online videos, how to do this, how to do that. The listening part is really up to the individual to decide how far you want to take your ear, how far do you want to train it, because it is true, the deeper you listen and the harder it is to zoom back out and just listen for enjoyment. And if you want to see behind the curtain, then do some deep listening exercises where you can pick stuff out of mixes. The way you do that, by the way, is you identify the sounds in isolation, and then they're so much easier to hear in context. But today we're going to focus on the choosing part, the decision-making concept of how do I decide. And in a way, that music production is a bunch of usually small decisions made over time. So you could say any single decision isn't important, but they're all important because they all add up to the sum total of the finished work. It's like saying, which brushstroke was the Mona Lisa finished with? You know, are there more brushstrokes than there need to be on that? Or if you took one away, would it matter? Probably not. If you took 2 away, would it matter? Probably not. And if you keep going with that, logically, there's a point where, yeah, it would matter. It wouldn't have been the same painting. But where is that point? Same with audio. The little tiny steps you're doing all along the way, which one of them is the important one? And they're all important, and individually, they're usually not that important. There are, however, big steps and big decisions that you'll make from time to time that are very important. But most of the decisions are, should I turn the snare up? How much? Do it, listen, decide. Is that enough? Not enough? Do it, listen, decide, and so on. There are a bunch of little decisions, but they all add up. So with that in mind, it's important that you're making these decisions correctly. And that involves usually setting up a comparison that will be fair to the process. So that just means if you're going to A/B something, you've got to give yourself every chance to hear what's really there. Part of that is I like to set up a 1-button switch for that process. And combinators and Reason are great for that. In fact, I think I might already have one set up here. Now this is not a great example because this one is going to switch between an EQ on and off. I thought I needed to include the Selig gain for gain compensation, but I'm doing it over here instead. So it's the same as flipping this, but this is a little tricky switch to flip accurately. The benefit of this too is that, oh, I might have already assigned it. I can assign this to a hardware button. Oh, speaking of hardware, new toys. We'll get to that later. I can't pull this out far enough to see what I need to see. There's the button. So the EQ is on the little keyboard line. You probably can't even tell. I would have to solo it. But you can do the trick where you click it a bunch of times without looking and then listen and A, B, or I don't know which one's A and which one's B anymore. I'm not looking. I'm just hearing whatever I'm hearing. I would probably do that soloed if I was really getting analytical. So why one button switch? That has to do with the fact that a lot of our audio memory, it's like memorizing words is usually easy for us if we practice and do it. Memorizing melodies is a little bit easier, but it still probably takes more work. Memorizing sounds is even harder in my mind. And so all that means is that we have a short sonic, spectral, and transit memory, or dynamic memory. And that that's why it makes it so hard to like switch speakers in a speaker test without a switcher. If you have to go around back and replug one in and the other one out, that's time taken away, and then you're going to come back and sit down and try to remember what you were hearing before, and it's easy to get fooled. So by putting a one button switch, you can quickly decide between two things. Oh, and by the way, in Reason, there's a really easy way to do that. If you have any two channels, I'll just use two random channels. Let's see, we've got two drums here. So if I mute this one, now we hear this drum here. If I want to switch and listen to this drum, I just hit solo and then unsolo. So I can go back and forth with one button just by doing that. So, and that works in the little line mixer and the 14.2 mixers as well. So the amount of time, therefore, is going to be limited to almost near instantaneous if you can just switch with one button. This comes in handy if you're trying to compare two different compressors or EQ or not EQ. And now we got to talk about the big, if there is one rule in audio that seems to come back around and around, and I should have made a text banner for this, it's louder sounds better. Louder sounds better. And I say it that way, louder sounds better, not louder is better, because it's all relative, and it does sound different. We can prove that. The Fletcher-Munson or the equal loudness curves showed us that at different volumes we can actually perceive different relationships spectrally. Different frequencies will sound stronger or weaker at different volumes compared to the others. So there is a difference that is made with regards to volume and sound. So there must be a way to use that to our advantage, or not to use it to our advantage. There must be a way to be aware of that, to not let it take advantage of us. There's a way to put the word advantage into this sentence. So when you're doing an A/B test, if one of them is louder than the other, it's going to skew your preference towards the louder one. So it's important that you match their levels. Now, I'm also careful to say levels because there are optional ways to do that. One is to match the peak level of the sound, and that has benefits, and I'll explain that in a minute. Another is to match the average level, the VU or RMS meter level. And the third is probably somewhere between those two, is just to do it by ear. And whichever you choose, you should have a reason for, but whichever you choose, there's one more little tip I'll leave you, and that is to, after you've decided you prefer one over the other, let's say I prefer B over A when I'm going back and forth between them, I will always then take the preferred level and reduce it. So if it's B that I liked, I'll turn B down a couple of dB maybe, and then compare again. And if I still like it, then I'm pretty sure it's the one I'm going to like the next day and the next day. Because if it's softer and I still like it, then it's better. Or at least we can say I'm not being subject to the louder sounds better situation. And if it's not better, and if you're confused again, then I just run the test again and basically do a best 2 out of 3. And at some point, if it's not a consistent decision, then I usually take off whatever I'm trying to add. Let's say I'm adding compression and I'm A-Bing and I'm not getting a clear which one is better when I level them and play them at different levels. Then in that case, it's probably ditch the thing and maybe come back to it later if you still find that there's an issue, or maybe it's not compression that needed. Maybe the issue you were trying to solve was better solved some other way. So when you compare two things with the same peak level, for example, if I'm going to do this one before the EQ, now I'll also say this, it's usually a good idea to loop the audio that you're using to compare so that you don't get, you're not comparing apples to oranges. So when I hit the bypass switch, I want to hear the same audio but through the processing, and then the same audio but not through the processing. If you're playing one-shot samples, then that's not as much of a problem. Anything else that has velocity and any other natural variation, alternate samples or anything like that, you probably want to find a way to make sure you're triggering the same one every time so that you can focus. You eliminate the variables, and then whatever differences you're hearing, you're positive are coming from what you're doing. So this is just, it's a good bit of EQ. It's 7.5 dB. It's just pushing the mid-range forward. But I have to compensate by about almost 3 dB to keep the same peak level around -12 in this case. Let's see if I did that accurately. Actually, it's only -14. Okay, so then I would go 2 dB again, and this should keep it at -14. Now, I did this in another file. Did I leave this open? When you do a comparison, you can often end up with let's do this. This is an example I did here. I added this EQ. Let's see if I turn this up a little bit. I know, college drums. Sorry, it's just so handy. Okay, that's the before. That's after. And of course, right away I said, that sounds better. And this has happened to me before, so I immediately said, I got to save that because this is the example, the classic example. That sounds better, but let's look at what's happening with our levels here. In bypass, we should be hitting right at -12. With the EQ on, we're going up 4 dB now. So that means to really compare this fairly, I need to pull 4 dB out of there. So now, that's before. That's after. What? Really? Before? After. That EQ, that adding the bottom in, even cutting a little bit of the mud out and pushing some top shine on there, all just kind of canceled itself out. When I was doing it, I thought I'm going to push this up, pull that back, push this up, make a nice sound here. And then when you compensate for the boosted overall level, you get something that's almost the same as it was before. The first time I did that with an EQ, oh, it was so disappointing. I thought everything I knew about EQ was wrong. And in a way it was, because louder sounds better. You think you're making it better when you're boosting stuff. The same thing with the compressor, especially with something like the FET style, where to get more compression, you have to crank the input, which gives you more loudness, usually. And then once you've added that loudness, then it sounds better, right? Louder is better. So that's the idea. This is also, let's see, let's take that off for a second. Oh, it's off now. Let's look at these two compressors. And this is a setup I made that switches the FET off and the channel dynamics on, and vice versa. So it's basically swapping between the two. This is the most common thing I do when I'm building, when I'm doing a comparison. In fact, I made a version of it right here that's just literally one button, although that button is a little cut off there. And then a crossfader. Oh, I have to show devices. That switches between them. So you can plug any two things into this and then switch between them there. Again, the one button approach gives you the ability to not forget what you've just heard, and the looping the same slice of audio gives you the ability to remove any changes of the performance, any velocity or alternate samples, or if it's an acoustic instrument, even more so, or a drum loop that's from a live kit. So you want to remove those. In fact, one thing I often do is, if it's a drum loop, I will just trigger some slices so that I have, except for I'd want a little bit, the same kick, the same snare, or maybe just one of those. And then you can A/B. So let's go back to this. Oh, the whole thing is bypassed. So there we go. I was trying to make these two the same, and I was confirming that for the most part I still prefer the SSL for adding some fat drums, attack to drums, and making them pop a little bit more. But the setup is also switching this Selig gain with the SSL compressor, so that because there's no output gain on the channel dynamics. Boo. They put it on the EQ, yay, but not on the channel dynamics. Because it's auto makeup, it's never going to be exactly right. In fact, almost always with the SSL compressor, they have erred on the side of making it louder when you add compression, which we know what that does. That fools you, again, into thinking that it's something that it's not. So obviously you can hear big differences. Okay, so that's hitting at -12. We've got to look at the bottom gain level here. That's the FET, which, although it sounds softer, is actually had a higher peak level. So we actually would need to bring that down 2 dB, ouch, for it to not go up that high. And that's a difference in crest factor. If we match the peaks at the same point, then the average levels will be the variable. And when the average level is lower, like it is with the FET, and the peaks are the same, then it will sound softer, because loudness is one way to measure, at least short-term loudness, is by looking at the crest factor, the difference between the peak and the VU. The meters in Reason are perfect for this. Let me show you. We have to go up here, and let's see. Oh, we had a clip. Yeah, I don't have a limiter or anything on this, so it's free for all. So let's look at, okay, this is when I would do the this trick, because I need something consistent. So what we're looking at is, you'll see the peaks both go up to 12 at some point. Make sure. Right, and this is the SSL, this is the FET. Now I didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to match them or anything. This is just where they naturally ended up. So what's the difference? Let's look at the FET. Let's zoom in here. And we can see its peak is at 12 and its average is 32, 34, 36. So minus 36. By the way, on the big meter, it's this point at 32 dB below clipping that the meters go to 2 dB per segment to the left on the lower values, and it's 1 dB to the right. So you see that this division is 4, the difference between 28 and 32, and then this next step, same number of pixels of LEDs is 8. So counting 32, 34, 36. So 36 minus 12, that's our crest factor, and then same peak level. So now look at where our VU comes up to 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. So this is 30 versus 36. So that basically just says the peak being the same, the VU on, or the RMS average level of the channel dynamics is 6 dB higher than the FET compressor. And that's what using a common peak level allows us to do. So why would that be important to know? Well, if you're trying to make a loud mix, and a lot of people are these days, then I've always said it starts with loud. Every choice you make from the very first one should be focused on finding the loud. And that includes in choosing your samples or your compression that you're using, and making sure that you're getting the highest average with your whatever the consistent peak level is. So you put all your peaks the same. If you had 10 samples to choose from for a kick drum and you were looking to really be loud, then you would choose the one with the smallest crest factor. That's the closest peak to average relationship, because the higher that the average level is for the same peak, the louder it's going to sound. Okay, so louder sounds better. If you only leave here today with that one thing, that's a very important one that I would not want anyone to forget. So let's look at the other time that you're making these decisions, these types of decisions. That would be when you have a situation where you've got a new piece of gear and you're trying to evaluate it and you're trying to understand, how is this going to work in my setup? So what you do in that case is you would be probably, if you're just starting out, then you're going to go through and just find the sounds you like, whether it's a reverb device, whether it's a synthesizer, whether it's anything with presets. And you're going to go through and you're going to just put a little star next to the ones that you like, or make them your favorite in Reason if you're in Reason. And if you are not new to this process, then you're probably comparing it to something you already have. Like if it's a synth, you're wondering, can it do the pads that I like? Can it do the bass sounds I like? Can it do the leads that I like, or whatever? If it's a compressor, you're like, can it make the vocal sound the way I like? Can it do the drums the way I like? And you're probably going to be like comparing, like I'm doing up here, the old compressor with the new one, and trying to make it to see if you can get it to sound better or if it's not as good. So setting that up is important. Also, if it's something like a reverb, or a compressor, then your source material that you're going to test it with is also important. And I suggest that you do this offline rather, which just means don't do it when you're in the middle of a mix that you're trying to finish. Don't, unless you have confidence and time, because you'll end up with the situation of, I'm almost done with the mix. Let's try this other new compressor on the vocal. Ooh, shiny new thing. And an hour later, and you're still fine-tuning knobs and checking the manual to learn about this new device. If you have the time for that, go for it. There are plenty of ways to put things in context, but I like my first contact with a new device to be just me and the device and kind of, but I have experience, so I know what a sound that sounds one way on its own is going to do in a mix. So when I hear a nice, big, huge, fat, wide sound, I'm almost always thinking, that'll never go in a mix, as opposed to, woo, big sound. And likewise, sometimes when I hear these really thin, wispy sounds, I think, oh, that'll be perfect, because I just need sometimes the icing on the cake and not the whole cake. So this was all based on my early experiences as an assistant engineer. I remember a specific case at the Castle Recorders in Franklin where Chuck Ainley was the chief engineer, and we had just got a new 480 Lexicon with the Lark controller. We had a 224 before that, so it'd be 1984-ish. And I was asking him what it's good on. He said, well, this is great for vocals, and try this on drums. I can't remember what it was now, but it was the takeaway was, how do you know that? How do you know which one sounds good on vocals and which one sounds good on drums? And what engineers tend to do, and I suggest others do this too, is they get the new piece of gear and they get some basic sounds. They pull up some tracks that they're familiar with, probably something that they've already mixed. And they just start running through the presets, like find a snare and loop it. And on a tape machine, that's a little clunky. So it's really so nice to be able to do stuff like that in a DAW these days. But one of the things that I like to listen for is do a side stick, stick across the snare sound into the reverb so that you can kind of hear the shape. And I can set that up really quick here because I find it so handy. Also, quick little side note, you can see my favorites lists down here. I don't know if I've showed folks this before. I have instruments, effects, utilities, and players at the bottom of my list here. And that's the same grouping that's at the top of the list, and it's just my own version of it. So it's the instruments I likely use, the effects I use the most, the utilities I use the most, and the players I use the most, just so I don't have to scroll, although this instrument list has gotten pretty out of control now. And interestingly, it doesn't have the one instrument that I want to use today, the redrum. I guess I don't think that's a valuable instrument. Ha. Let's show you what I'm talking about with this idea of the side stick. Some Bob Clear Mountain drums, and we'll just use that one. And let's say I was looking at the classic RV 7000. So I would use this to kind of get a feel for the shape of the room. Now you'll notice, I'll just do one. When we change the room shape, we'll hear a different order of echoes, and it has a different quality to it. If you increase the size, you can exaggerate that. And if you keep it all wet, you'll exaggerate it too. And actually, if we take that up, we can hear it better too, and take pre-delay off. So I'm trying to exaggerate everything so I can hear these different room sizes. Oh, I hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay, that's room 1. It's room 2. 3. 4. Now, which one of them sounds better? I don't really know. I can't really tell you. I tend to use room 4. And also, here's another interesting thing I didn't realize. When you take the early reflections out, you still hear changes in the shape of the room. You can see them on the display. I thought that the room shape only applied to the early reflections on this device. It doesn't. It changes the reverb tail sound too. Again, wrong button. There. 3. That has a right-left thing in my headphones. That does too. And that's a little tighter cluster. So you can hear the, I don't know if you can hear it. I can hear room 4 has like some after echoes. It's got some bumps. I love the comparison to if we take like a plate reverb and assume that that's the densest, most smooth decay, which is just going to be almost like if you've ever loaded white noise into a convolution reverb. White noise with a decay is going to be the theoretically smoothest reverb you can have. But what is interesting to me is hall types with these, what I've heard people call them bumpy shapes. So we can increase the decay time and maybe even hear it even better. I don't know if that makes it easier or harder. Sounds like and it's different on the different rooms. That one sounds more like da da da, like a triplet. Anyway, it's subtle, and it's those irregularities that can make a sound interesting and a little bit more complex. And the general rule that I've followed is that the more complex the sound, the fewer of them will actually work in any particular mix. So if your mix starts to get muddy, look for things that are making it complex, extra chorusing, extra delay repeats and things, anything that is just making the sound more complex. And that's the beauty working with minimalist music is that you can use these really big sounds, those types of sounds that you hear as a preset, and go, ooh, too big for a mix, but great for an intro. Now, let me show you one more thing, and I'll have a free download of this. A lot of times when you're setting up these comparisons, you need a constant source, a test tone or something. I'll turn this down a little because you just... I don't hear it. What have I done? Oh, I've put it through a combinator. Hang on, it's B. I mean, it's A. Okay. Now I can turn it down. This is a, this won't stop when you hit stop. So that habit I have of hitting the space bar to make things stop is not going to work on this one. What you have here is basically a sine wave generator with 2 preset frequencies, 100 and 1K. And then you also can go into the wide mode from 10K down to 20 hertz. And then we have noise, which defaults to gray noise, which I don't know if you know what gray noise is, but it's hella cool because it represents the way that we hear through the equal loudness contour. So if we turn this on, you'll see it's got this big dip, and it kind of looks like the Fletcher-Munson curves. This is based on an AES, is it C weighting or A weighting? Now I can't even remember. Because it's probably the most accepted gray noise source. And this is just a fun recent thing I've added. It has nothing to do with what I'm talking about today other than I think it's cool. And then we can switch to color, which will start at white, which is going to sound really loud and abrasive. Okay, so white's just flat, equal energy at every frequency. And then pink noise here is a 3 dB per octave slope, and that's equal energy in every octave. And then I'm taking liberties and calling this red noise. And red and brown are often interchanged, but I've seen other people do this too, where they use red before brown. So that's red, which is a 4.5 dB per octave slope, and then brown, which is a 6 dB per octave slope. And that sounds dramatic because we're listening across 10 octaves. So even a subtle 6 dB per octave slope, which wouldn't be a whole lot on a filter, is a lot on a noise source. But for those that are into the mixing to pink noise, this is a very interesting tip I've heard. Is like if you have a control that you can vary like this, you can go a little darker if your mixes are still turning out bright, or a little brighter if they're turning out too dark. You can have these in between pink and white and red and brown positions that you can find that will be sometimes more produce better results. But for testing, it's usually going to be pink noise, or maybe gray noise if you're doing something, or white noise if you're looking for a frequency response. So this is a handy tool, but it does use it uses complex because it has the best noise and sine generators, and it's easy to keep it on without having to trigger it like Thor or other synths. And I'm using coloring EQ because it was the only EQ where I could get these slopes and allow them to be dialed in variable amounts, which is also the key for creating. If you look at when I changed the noise blend, you'll see the curve actually shifts, starts at white noise, goes down, down, down. And there's, of course, to get that to come out that way, there's a lot going on, including output level compensation, so that the peak level stays around -12 the whole time. It's not perfect, but it's within a dB or so. So this is handy if you need to calibrate levels. If you're trying to, for example, set up two different compressors, and trying to understand how they work and what their level relationship is, then it's very handy to be able to have a steady and clean source, a sine wave that doesn't have harmonics. And Complex One does that very well. I'll show you an example of that, a way to use a tone like this, and we will look at this. Okay, so here is the FET compressor, which we probably all know, or at least know of. What's interesting about this device is it doesn't have a threshold on it, per se. Instead, you have an input and an output control. That is to say, it does have a threshold control. It's just not operatable by the end user. So it's fixed. And so is mastering limiters, such as ozone. If you think about it, the threshold, which you think that you're moving the threshold, but you're not. You're actually increasing the input. The threshold is at 0 dB because that's the point you don't want to go above. So no matter where you turn this, the threshold is still at 0 dB. So this is basically input, and ceiling is output. So it works a lot like an 1176 FET style. Coincidentally, what we know where the threshold is on that, it's at 0. But where's the threshold on the FET? So using the tone generator, we can actually answer that question. And we have to send it through, but we don't have to listen to it back. Is it going? Yes. So what we want to do is see where the needle starts deflecting. And this is going to be a very crude estimation. Actually, we want fast attack and fast release. Now, another odd thing about the FET is the ratio is not really, let me show you. Okay, so normally when we adjust the ratio, let's go down to 1 to 1. So that's nothing. So the needle's going back to 0. as we go up to 4-1, we get more gain reduction. In other compressors, as the ratio goes above 4-1, you still get more. But look what happens here. We're actually getting less. It's got a weird ratio. And I've had it explained to me why it does what it does. So at 20-1, we're actually only getting about half, about 3 dB compared to what we get at 4-1. So 4-1 is the strongest compression on this, at least on this model. Now, I haven't compared this to a real one, partly because they don't have a continuous ratio. They have stepped ratio. So getting back to finding the threshold, we get the most compression. That's the highest ratio we have on this one, and the fastest attack and release. And then we turn this up until we start to see gain reduction. Now it looks like it's happening somewhere around here. So somewhere around -9. Now we have to calculate a little bit here because our signal is not 0. Our signal is -12. So meaning our input. And let me just clarify that, and I'll make an adjustment that lets us do that. I'm going to put a Selig gain on either side of this. I'm going to turn this one down. I'm going to turn this one up 12 dB. So now we're coming in at clipping at 0 dB full scale. And now we'll see the actual place where the threshold is. And the number that we get here will be the number that is going to be, there we go. The actual threshold is about at -20 or so. Let's check that. You know what? Let's go to -24 and put this on 0 and see if my math is right. Then this should also happen at -20. Oh my gosh, I've got the input coming in at -12, so hang on, it will be, okay, so that's -12, so -8 is -20. Math, yes. So, oh, I can use the meter here. Duh. All right, so -19 starts the needle deflecting. -20, it's just starting to, but not quite doing it. So we'll call it -20 or so is where the threshold is. That means that for a signal that is at -20, you won't get any gain reduction until you adjust the input. I hope that makes sense. It's a weird way to think about it, but it's kind of it's the answer to the question, but how you use that answer it's up to you. It's like, what difference does it make that the threshold is at -20? Well, that means typically if I leave this at 0 and if I'm sending a signal in that's at -12, it's going to give me around 6 dB of gain reduction. Not quite 6 dB because we're not infinite to 1 ratio, but it'll give me close to, looks like about 5 dB with a sound coming in at -12. That's for a sustained sound. Now, when we start to put drums through it, you'll see we need a lot more signal unless we're using fast attacks. It's all related. It can be so confusing. But that's just to prove that there is a threshold inside the FET compressor. There's just not a knob on the front that lets you adjust it. And that explains why when you turn up the input, you get more gain reduction, but you also get more loudness. For example, let's hear a real sound instead of a pretend one. Let's see. Let's go back to the beat. I think that's a little more exciting than So as we turn it up, it gets more and more squash. We are essentially going farther and farther over the threshold. So in a normal compressor, it's like turning up the input if there's an input, or turning down the threshold. It's not exactly the same, I'm sorry. It's like turning up the input on the side chain input. That gets even crazier. I won't go deep there today, but that's just the general idea, is that there are ways to use these tools like tone generators to find answers and figure out what's going on. So I have ignored the chat. I'm so sorry. I see that there's comments here. And let's see if there's anything I need to answer. What reason? Oh, at Andrews. Reason 12, and I'm using Reason 12 and high pushed button. How are you? So, yeah. Now, I've noticed, we can talk about that for just a second, as far as what version people are using. I've noticed that Mac users dodged a bullet somehow on this one. We're often the ones that have the weird problems that are not fixed because it's a smaller community, smaller market. But it seems like in this case of version 12, we've had fewer problems because I don't have any real issues, and even during beta testing didn't have many issues other than the obvious ones where people were devices weren't updated yet or drawing weird things down in the transport and stuff like that. But I've only had one hard crash even during beta testing. You can see there's a little weirdness going on here in this player and drum sequencer, but that could just be because I just switched resolutions too. Anyway, I'm just happy because I just finished an album and was waiting to update until after the album finished, and I probably could have done it even in Reason 12, but I've learned you do not switch horses in the middle of the race. So I will post a link back in Reason Talk about the where to get the function generator if you want it. I've also got the older version that uses, what does it use? I have to go into the combinator patches. Oh, actually, no, it's right here. This one was not quite as elegant because I had to make separate versions. So if I wanted the noise, and all it does is white noise. This uses all stock devices. Oh, yes, all one of them, Thor. Of course, I used to use Thor for everything. So I'll post this one as well. I don't know if I made that so it's switching. This was never meant to be like the quality that would be acceptable for release. And I included all the waveforms. Now I know that I never need. But this is, I mean, probably people have done this same thing themselves already. It's just when I need to check levels, I've got a tone that's at 12, minus 12 dB automatically. It's a clean sine, so I can use it to run it into saturation and look at the spectrum response and see, not for noise, obviously, and see if there is harmonics being added. It's another way you can compare pieces of gear. Let me think if there's anything I didn't cover that I wanted to cover. Oh, I actually have a list. So let me just review what I've been talking about. Audio production can be hyper distilled down to it being a series of mostly small decisions. But like brush strokes on a painting that all add up, and it's hard to know which ones are the ones that contributed, and were there any that you could have left off and still had the great work at the end of the day? That's a rhetorical question. But if it's a series of decisions, then you need to be good at making decisions if you're going to be good at producing music. And it's not a matter of making decisions that are right or wrong. For me, I defined it as I want to be able to make decisions in the studio in the moment that I still can stand by 5 years or 10 years ahead in time. I don't, obviously there's going to be things that are like, wow, I've grown a lot since then. So yeah, there's growth, but in general, I just try to make decisions line up with where I'm going to be, because I noticed that it wasn't always easy to do that. And there were things like louder sounding better that were probably fooling me into thinking I was choosing wisely when I wasn't, and not doing proper A/B comparisons, or not comparing them at the right level, or not too much time between comparisons. or comparing apples and oranges, for example, comparing a compressor on a live drum kit where just as I put the compressor in, the drummer starts playing softer or harder, and I don't realize it, so I make the choice that, I like that better, but it was also not just the compressor I liked, it was the drummer playing softer or louder at the same time. So that's why you got to remove the variables, and once I started doing that, I noticed I got a lot better at not cringing when I listened back to my old music. And a lot of that was just working on setting myself up for success, literally, and defining success as me being happy, not as it being some sort of commercial target or some sort of a goal outside of yourself. So, well, I think I've run out of steam in my brain, idea-wise, and checking the chat again. Yes, the last update seems to have fixed the issues many have noticed. And you're happily ignorant of any issues that remain, and I don't mind being happily ignorant of issues that remain. If they don't get in my way, I'm happy to ignore them. I've come to the conclusion that I overproduce my 8-bar loops. That could be a whole nother subject, is when do you stop? I like to think of that as horizontal versus vertical work. If your horizontal work is where you take 8 bars and you build it up, stack it up, and you make that 8 bars sound like a freaking record. And then you're stuck in that 8-bar loop because that's all you've done. And then days pass and you can't really figure out how to add to that. What I like to do instead is that's vertical production. I like to do horizontal production where I lay down something simple first. And this song here that I started with, which I'll end with, is a good example of that. And this is also an example of new gear explorations. The Ethereal Earth was being offered for free recently. I saw a post online and I looked at that and thought, that looks like something I'd like. And then a bell went off and I realized I own that. I already have that and I should call it up. And I basically went through about 20 or 30 until I found the particular one that this song starts with and started playing what you're hearing and like, well, that's cool. That's a song. So a lot of times, if I'm in the middle of a exploratory process and a song comes, all hail the song, you know. I'll stop whatever I'm doing when a song idea comes because that's what I'm in it for. If I'm, cleaning up the studio and a song comes, I leave the mess and I start to work on the song. If I'm talking on the phone with somebody, I hang up. I don't think that's ever happened, but I would hang up and call them back after I do the song. But the idea of horizontal production is you get as much out of the initial idea, enough variations in the long form. And so in this case, what did I do? I did only about a minute, and then I doubled it, and I'll build on that. But I felt like I got enough, and then I wanted to find some drums. So it started with, actually it started with this. And I'm literally playing that thinking I should do a bass line, so I bring the bass line in with the left hand. Then I wanted some drums. I wanted some big drums, some big noisy over-the-top drums, and I remembered I had the Butch Vig drums, which are great for this. Oh, and at the same time, I also wanted some sort of constant thing to go, because the drum kit, and I often do this, I often have a drum kit and a drum machine playing side by side. The drum kit is bashing the hi-hats, and the drum machine is and hitting a low 909 bass. So I just went through and played these in long form, not trying to do a loop or anything. that? Basically, just getting something that's like energy, the energy I'm looking for. And I'm not sure if the pattern's right. I'm not sure if the anything is actually final, but I like the feel. I've got something that I feel is worth investing in. And if you invest in an 8-bar loop, building it and producing it essentially, then that's what you're going to get good at. If you try to do long form, then that's what you're going to get good at. So if you don't want to do 8-bar loops, don't keep doing them and getting so good at making an 8-bar loop. It's a little bit clunkier. I have a higher hit or miss ratio to this because in order for this to work, I have to come up with variations. In order for an 8-bar loop to work, I don't. I just have to come up with 8 good bars. And although I can sometimes come back to those 8 bars and add it onto it, it's about the only thing I've ever found that I can do with my 8-bar loops is to give them to somebody else to come up with 8 more bars based off of that. And that's the beauty of that's the beauty of a collaborator right there, is to get you out of the rut. But yeah, you've got the ringtone world, and also you've got commercial music. And I don't know if anybody, I don't mind doing that. I've submitted stuff to libraries before. I rather enjoy it because it's outside of my wheelhouse. My usual song length is 7 or 8 minutes on my solo music. So when I have to do something that's 1 or 2 minutes like this, I did some work for a trailer house in Utah when I was there, a big company, Nonstop Music, and I went through their whole library. I was basically hired freelance to come in and go through their whole library and put together what would they be called? Just one song fading into another, 20 seconds of each song, 10 songs from every library, and they had like 100 libraries. So I was there on and off for a month, and when it was done, after just, I learned through osmosis, so I just absorbed this shorter format concept, and when I was done, I remember going home one day and sitting in front of the computer and going, can I do a 2-minute song or even a 1-minute song and make it have a beginning, a middle, and an end and feel like it's complete? And lo and behold, I did it. And I remember looking up going like, okay, we'll start here, then we'll go to this section, then we'll break it down, then we'll go there. 2 minutes, yes! It felt like a breakthrough. And it was just by osmosis, just by listening to hundreds of examples of pieces of music that were written incredibly short. And I think that's how, what I've learned is that's how my brain works. And everybody that's listening to this or listens to this, maybe your brain doesn't work like that. Maybe it does, but find out. You need to understand how your brain works so you can get to the place that you want to get to, wherever that is. All right, demo reels. Yeah, demo reels. Demos. Well, I'm going to end it on that random phrase, demo reel. And we'll be back in a month, and I will be here still, I think. Oh, I forgot to do my traditional intro to talk about how beautiful the weather has been. Last time it was snowing, I think, and this time it's almost 80 degrees, and it feels like a completely different world, and spring is here finally. The flowers are blooming. It was hit and miss there for a while. I didn't know if we were going to make it because it just kept staying cold. But finally, the last couple of days have been very, very gorgeous. But that also means the bugs are out, and we're in the forest. And so, yeah, stay clear of the underbrush. And we'll see you next time.